Good afternoon or good morning to all of our participants for our webinar today. My name's Dave Bissett. I'm a partner with Argon Co in Australia and New Zealand. We have a number of speakers from the group today across Poland and Argon Co directly, and I'll introduce the team in a second. The topic of our webinar today will be how to go green while improving your gross margins. Our speakers today will be Jonathan Engels from Poland Consulting, who are a part of the Argon Co family of companies. Poland specialises in operations consulting, particularly from a manufacturing industry perspective. John George, who's our Chief Business Development Officer based in Singapore for the region. John's had a significant career in industry and an expert in this space. And then we have Chris Cave-Jones, who's the Regional Director of our Singapore office, who will also join us on the call and lead us through the Q&A process of the webinar. Welcome, gentlemen, and looking forward to the webinar this afternoon. In terms of the agenda, so what we essentially are looking to walk through in this webinar is not a value chain assessment or consideration of sustainability or green operations. We're going to get quite specific in terms of operations sustainability and how focusing on opportunities that exist in our operations space, we can address and mitigate some of the pressure points that we are experiencing right now through the pandemic, but also post-pandemic in terms of cost pressures across the board. And Jonathan and John will talk us through that in a lot of detail and provide some real specific industry examples of what others have done in this space and what opportunities there may be for your organisations. We'll then finish off with Q&A, and hopefully we'll have 10 or so minutes to walk through any questions that come up over the course of the webinar. This is the first webinar that we are doing as a regional webinar, so it's exciting for us that we can talk to the region as opposed to our specific markets, and I hope that you get a lot out of the webinar. Okay, so for those that aren't fully familiar with Argon Co, I'll do a quick introduction and then hand it over to Jonathan to get into the content. So Argon Co is a global management consultancy. We have over 400 consultants in 7 or 8 markets around the world, across Europe, the Americas, the Middle East, and Asia Pac. We specialise in operations strategy and operations excellence, and we have a very strong local presence in the region through Australia, New Zealand, Singapore and Hong Kong, as well as Mumbai. In terms of the type of work we do from an operations standpoint, it's end-to-end from strategy all the way through to supporting clients with implementation. From a sustainability perspective, it's one of our core platforms as a brand and as a group globally to be working in this space, and we can support businesses not only through understanding their end-to-end sustainability needs and goals, but also to help support specific actions in bringing some of these opportunities to life within an organisation. Our client base is fairly broad. We work with both local, regional and global organisations, and it can be organisations specific to a region or country or some of the larger brands in the world. From a sustainability perspective, we've worked with a number of these global brands in various aspects of supporting their sustainability goals. Okay, so back to the topic of today, and I'll hand over to Jonathan. But with the ever-increasing pressure on supply chain costs through the pandemic, but I think also underlying how going green and driving sustainability improvements in your operation space is certainly a way to mitigate these increasing costs and to look at trying to find opportunities from a margin sense with all the other pressures. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. As David mentioned, the supply chain costs obviously have a dramatic impact on how we get our product or service to market. The global pandemic has taught us a number of lessons in that space. Probably the key lesson is around cost. We all have cars that we attempt to fill up with fuel. We go grocery shopping. We travel, or we used to. Each of these is an area where we've personally felt a dramatic impact from the pandemic. For business, this pain is felt more keenly through those rising supply chain costs, and then the knock-on effect that this has on your operation. Ultimately, this drives up the cost of your product, but adds no value. So, what are some of those key headwinds, these external factors that stand in the way of us operating as efficiently as possible? Procurement of raw materials. You need only think of the global chip crisis, uncertainty at a global scale, Ukraine and Russia. Need I say more? How we move and store materials and finished goods, regulation, labor. That was a moving feast before the pandemic. It's only been further exacerbated. You need only think of the amount of sick leave that is being taken currently in your business. These factors and many others contribute to this increasing complexity and cost of again, getting your product or service to market. So what can we do about it? Ultimately, gross margin is the meter stick by which we measure performance of our operation. These margins are, however, tempered and impacted by the headwinds that I just covered. So doing the math, as it were, we either need to increase revenue by getting the customer or the consumer on side. The message here is why you should buy or procure my product or service. Alternatively, you can drive down the cost of goods sold. So that is achieved by steering the ship that is your business or your operation and influencing factors and driving improvements in areas that are directly under your control. One of these factors is sustainability, typically relating to areas that are not directly adding value to your end product, so overheads. So what does this mean? Well, we can drive improvements and savings in these areas without impacting on our output. So we can maintain value while reducing the cost of goods sold. Over to you, John George.
Thank you, Jonathan. So let me now bring you all to this house which we see. This is about sustainability. How do we improve gross margin? And where we see the three areas which you can do is one in terms of energy reduction in the energy use and also cost savings thereon. Same thing applies to water and the same thing to waste. So energy, waste, and water are three areas where we think that we could improve our gross margins by bringing down the cost. Now, this whole thing is underpinned, we need to have the enablers and KPIs underneath that, and stretching across this whole sustainability agenda is about the culture in the organization. So today for our conversation, we would be talking about energy, and we'll be focusing on energy, the enablers and KPIs behind that, and also what is the culture we need to exhibit to ensure that we have a sustainable mindset in terms of saving energy and thereby cost savings and thereby gross margins. Water and waste will be subject to a conversation later on in other forums. Now, how have we gone about the approach in these areas? So as like anywhere else in business, you have the three dimensions. You have the strategic dimension, which is running from 3 to 5 years and desired by the top management. Then you have the tactical ones, which are probably an year or two. And then finally, you have the operational ones, which is now, the here and now. So when we talk about strategy as pertaining to sustainability, we are talking about the carbon commitment the company has, the COP26 adherence and the policies and missions the company has. It could be the science-based target setting and how the company plans to achieve that. It may be about the UN Sustainable Development Goals and which of the goals of the 17 which the company wants to follow and how to achieve that. It could be about the corporate social responsibility activities a company may have. It may be about the stewardship program. For example, it could be like a company, at least the company I was working, we have one of our big products were cocoa and wheat, and they have stewardship programs like Cocoa Life or Wheat Harmony programs, which all of you in your company may be having. This primarily sets the vision and mission of the company for the next 3 to 5 years and decided by the top management and communicated externally. So for the purpose of our conversation today, we will not be touching this area about the strategic dimension, but focusing on the tactical and operational. But nevertheless, if anyone of you want to know more about strategic dimensions, how to drive that, how to put them across, or how to build the strategic mission and vision to drive the business, you can get in touch with us separately, and we can talk about that. So here we will talk about tactical and the operational aspects of improving gross margin. So as I mentioned, these are the three areas which we are looking at. And energy, this is, I'll just touch at the top level. Energy primarily talks about energy audits, talks about alternate sources, what are the sources we can use in terms of energy, and how do you leverage natural resources. As we go further, we will talk more and more about each one of those areas. And in terms of waste, just touching on it's about waste mapping. Where is the waste being generated? What are the 4 R's of waste? How does waste sit in a circular and collaborative economy? What are the government regulations? As we go along, the government is getting tougher and tougher in bringing legislation to ensure that the waste is handled by an organization pretty well and doesn't pollute the environment. So how do we go about it? And in terms of water, how is the water balancing done? Which are water stricken areas? Which are the non-water stricken areas? What are the dimensions there? What are the sources of water? These are all areas which, in a broad level, one has to think about when one needs to think about savings. So for this purpose of this conversation, we will focus on energy. Now, moving on, here, as I mentioned, we would be talking a lot about tactical as well as operational initiatives, how one can go about achieving savings or reducing and thereby resulting in savings. Now, let me talk a little bit about, there's a busy slide, but I will talk through each of these points. So, and one thing one needs to know, this tactical as well as operational imperatives are not independent of each other. They coexist. So that is why we have both of them in the same chart, because one complements another, and that is how one moves along. Now, the start point is I would invite your eyes to the left side of the slide where energy task force and governance starts. I'll be talking through in the clockwise manner. So energy task force, the first start point is to have a task force. It is about a set of people who think about energy savings. Now, this could be in terms of a dedicated team. It could be drawn cross-functional teams. It could be a set of utility managers. It could be supply chain leaders. It can be any team. But one need to have a task force to actually look behind the usage of energy and thereby savings on. Now, once that task force is there, they start identifying areas, looking into areas where one can have the quick wins. This is primarily what we all talk about is the low-hanging fruits. Where can we get the quick wins? And quick wins are there in organization everywhere. So the first part is you have to do an energy analysis to understand how does it vary? How does the energy pattern? What is the pattern of usage of energy? Does it vary month to month? Does it vary shift to shift? Does it vary process to process? So if one has a look at it, those data can give you a lot of inferences where energy is being consumed more than what is required. Now, the small bets could be the first. Let's look at it. Energy bill. A simple factor one can look into it is actually the power factor. Now, as you all know, the kilowatt hours is multiplied by the power factor to get, and then multiplied by the consumption rate or the rate per unit to get the bill. Now, most of the times, as the power factor tends to 1, the better it is for our billing and lower will be our billing. Now, how do we get ourselves to a power factor of 1? Mostly, if you look at industries, in my experience, many times we have looked at industries and we have found that many factories operate at 0.9 and 0.85 power factor. And it is very easy to get, it's not possible to get to 1, it is very easy to get to 0.995. And all one needs to do is to add a bank of capacitors. This is something which is not, it's not rocket science. It is something which can be implemented quick and fast, and your electrical engineers in your factory would definitely know how to improve the power factor, and that is one area, a quick win which can come by reducing the energy bills. Leaks are one very common in all the factories, whether it be compressed air or whether it be water leaks. Leaks are there anywhere in the factory, and it is pretty much very easy to look at leaks. I can give you a couple of examples. There was this factory which had air leaks. It was very easy to identify. And the plant manager was saying that, on a Sunday, he goes to the plant and looks out for snakes. And I really didn't get it. And I asked him, what do you mean by look out for snakes on a Sunday? He said, I look out for the hissing sound. It is just that the plant is shut that day, and you just listen to the hissing sound, and then you understand you have a leak, and you go out and plug it. So look at it. You can really serve energy out of coming out. It's compressed air leaks. It's about optimizing, your chiller loads. There are a whole number of stuff which we can actually practice. It could be even changing your tube lights or bulbs to LED bulbs. So there are a lot of quick wins which can give you incremental approach. They may not give you huge dollars, but definitely be a start point which will give you a start point which can engage the workforce and which can move forward. Step change. The step change we are talking about is actually technological transformation, replacements. So when we are talking about technological upgradation, is that existing process can be actually changed from a particular process to another process. I mean, I can talk about in the food and beverages industries, many a times where there are batch process which are converted to continuous processes, especially where you make beverages. I would say whether it is a malt-based beverage or a chocolate-based beverage, it is pretty much earlier it used to be a oven-baked process, which now the technology is to get into continuous band dryers to do that. Replacements. In terms of replacements, it's about replacing your old motors versus servo motors. It's a lot of stuff which can be done actually to upgrade your technology to really make savings for your business and thereby saving energy. Now, moving on, knowledge partnerships and energy audits. There are a number of partners in the business where you can actually partner with. It could be Schneider, it could be Honeywell. There are a number of partners in the business where you can actually partner with them, and they would actually give you the capability. They would educate your people, they would give you the capability, and they would put in systems in place to ensure that we do have the best utilization of energy. It can be even another one trend which is seen currently these days is actually partnering with universities. So many companies are today participating with the universities, where university programs are there, where youngsters they're either put on a competition or they are brought into the industry as trainees, or and then they are given certain assignments and the university works on that, and you use the expertise or the subject matter expertise of universities to see how the learnings from that can be implemented in the factory. And then moving on is about building internal capability and competency. It's extremely important to build internal capability, because if you don't know what you're looking for, it is very difficult to find it. So it is important that we make our people aware of what we need to look for. So if we need to look for savings in energy, then we need to have focused energy workshops, technological discussions, group discussions, etc. This is something not only about building the capability, it also generates engagement in the organization. Now we go into other measures which we have not covered in the above. So one area which I would highlight and talk about is looking at baseline efficiencies. Baseline efficiency is nothing but looking at an equipment and saying, is it delivering the competence it is supposed to deliver? We have a case study at the end, which I will talk about. This is about efficiencies of a compressor a factory has used. So I will save it till there. But it is all about looking at the efficiencies of each of the equipments to see that are they delivering the baseline efficiencies, and to get the machine back into the baseline. It could be by proper maintenance, it could be by overhauling, it may be by certain adjustments. One could get the machine back to the baseline and then get the capacities out of it. Energy contracts. This is what I was mentioning earlier about partnering with Schneider or Honeywell. These are organizations where they come in, and to some extent they are even ready to the extent of even putting in capex and opex on behalf of the company, and then work on something like a profit sharing model, where by implementing those strategies, one is able to generate energy savings, and the profits which come out of that are shared between the actual user and the companies which are into energy contracts. Solar energy is now the in thing, the in conversation now, which is about using solar power Now, as one would see that it is very capital intensity. Probably 10-15 years back, if one talks about it, the return of investment was probably running in the region of 15 to 20 years. Now, as time has gone by, now it has come down to about 5 to 7 years. But one should understand there are a number of agencies or number of suppliers in the market who work on the BOT or BOOT model, where they build, operate, and transfer, or build, operate, own, and transfer. So these are some things which we can look into. Purchasing power agreements. Purchasing power agreements are something which again is in vogue today. Purchasing power agreements are nothing but where there is an external agency. They may have a solar bank set up somewhere, or it could be even a wind farm. They get their natural energy and they get into the grid, and the grid transmits it, and then we can buy from the grid. This purchasing power, and a typical example here, what comes to my mind is the Melbourne City Council. Today, Melbourne City Council is giving out purchasing power agreements, and they're giving it to a number of plants. So this is an area where the advantage of this purchasing power agreements is that you don't have to go through the vagaries of the nature or vagaries of the price fluctuations, and one can have a constant pricing. You can know what is your pricing for the next 3 years, and thereby you can bring your cost down. Now, most of these areas which we were talking are actually pertaining to areas which is within the four walls, which is within our control. It could be our plants, it could be our offices. We are talking beyond manufacturing. We can also, when our goods and services get into the market, we are using logistic providers, either by rail, road, or sea, to get our products from our place to the place of the consumer or customer, as the use may be. Looking into tracking vehicles today, technology can do us tracking, and AI. We can use AI. We can understand what are the other metrics which we can use. We can do a truck route analysis, and thereby we can really reduce our operational costs there and save energy. Moving on, Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. So building on what John just worked through, we move on to enablers and KPIs. When we talk about enablers and KPIs, these are measures that propel the narrative of sustainability improvements, and for the most part provide an indirect benefit by laying the groundwork and preparing the landscape to drive these improvements and savings moving forward. Some of these enablers sit in the realm of technology. So alternative fuel sources, alternative fuel sources or equipment efficiencies that 10 years ago might have been unheard of. Legislative support. If you have a solar panel on your roof and you get a feedback rate from your power provider, you are taking advantage of a legislative mechanism. Economics, as John mentioned, solar panels, solar power is becoming far cheaper, and it's getting cheaper yet. Finance and resourcing, that's about how you finance and get resourcing in place to support these initiatives. Pooling, that could be within your business, between business units, or outside your business, through industry associations and bodies that collectively drive innovation and get these projects on the ground that you alone might not have been able to do. And then finally, purposeful projects. Are you building an enormous battery in South Australia? Are you building a solar concentrator somewhere out in the bush that small businesses can take advantage of? That's the bleeding edge that takes us out further and drives us forward. KPIs. These allow you to determine your current standing. So where do you stand in terms of your efficiency? Allows you to action your key focus areas, attain savings in those areas, and then sustain them moving forward. And finally, on the very right, we look at a typical KPI, which would be kilowatt hours. Generally, you measure these kilowatt hours relative to your production. So you measure that in terms of a unit or a process or a production run, otherwise thought of as intensity. When defining these KPIs, they should always be in accordance with what we can call the 6 A's on the right there. They should be aligned, attainable, acute, accurate, actionable, and alive. It's all about framing this KPI and making it realistic and bringing it along for the journey so that it ties in with your strategy. Next up, we'll be talking about culture, which I'll hand over to John again.
Thank you, Jonathan. So culture, as I mentioned in the beginning, culture underpins everything. Everything what we do, everything, it's the mindset. And it's the mindset, it is our mindset. So this is a topic which is pretty close to my heart, and I'm very passionate about driving this cultural change, whether it be in the plants where I worked, or in the community where I live, or in the family where I come from. So I'm very, very proud of this, and I'll take a time to go through this. So culture, we have bucketed this into three areas, and then we talk about some truths. So the first one is about the top management commitment, and there we talk about all the road leads to sustainable thinking. Now, as and by when we start thinking, if you look at it, most of the companies they start today their annual general body meeting, or many of their meetings starts about their commitment to their commitment towards environment and sustainability. Why is that there is this mind shift change? It has come about from the Paris Convention. It has come up from the COP26. So there is a general mind shift change in terms of how we want to view the world and how we want to view the world sustainability. So top management, and I probably say that this is something which should be embedded in top management of every company, is that all road leads to sustainable thinking. And that's the future for our planet Earth. Thought leadership, it is not about the now and here about the leadership. The leadership is about thinking into the future. And this is definitely what we are seeing across. We see commitments coming from various companies saying that by 2050 we will be carbon neutral. Certain companies are calling out that they will be carbon neutral by 2030. Certain companies say that they will be totally out of plastics in 2030. So there is a whole bunch of commitments which are coming from industry. And this comes from thought leadership. They are looking into the future. In fact, today this morning I was reading an article about an interview, not related to this. It was about and it says today, if you want to attract the right talent, you don't speak to them about how the company is performing now. You talk to them about how the company would perform 10 years from now. And that is what would inspire a true leader to join an organization. So I was translating this, and I was going for a walk when I was listening to this podcast, and it started, I was thinking about this webinar today, and I was thinking this is all about thought leadership. It's about looking into the future. It is not about now and here. Engagement. It's extremely important to start engagement, and engagement starts at top. So the moment you see that the leaders are engaged on the sustainability agenda and sustainability drive, it is pretty much easier for the rest of the organization to follow through. And as the saying goes, the speed of the train is the speed of the engine, and the engine here is the top management. So definitely in an organization, top management plays a very, very critical role in setting that sustainable mindset. Rewards and recognition. This is becoming more and more prominent these days. Earlier, it was always about the best sales guy or the guy who produced the maximum or marketing awards of the year. But slowly, it is changing. Today, people are being recognized for the sustainable efforts they are bringing into the business. So this is about the top management has a good role to play in bringing in the rewards and recognition. And that is how it can drive the culture. Moving on to the employee engagement, that is about talking about me, you, all of us on the call. It is what we need to think is, what is my part in the sustainability goal? Every company has a sustainability goal, which they have communicated externally. And if every employee should be made aware, what is his role in it? And trust me, when we know what our part is in the sustainability goals, we play an important role in that. The next thought is a better planet for my children. That today what we are going through are probably the repercussions of what we did 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years creating plastics and then filling the oceans with that. Now, if one really looks at it, probably it was the previous generation and the earlier part of our generation which would have led us to where we are today. So we need to start thinking. We need to tidy this up. And that is the way the world is thinking. We need to tidy this up and to see that we leave a better planet for our children and their children who are to come. We also need to understand energy produced is a dollar saved. any energy produced, if there is a dollar saved, it is a dollar which directly goes to the bottom line. So if there is $1 saved on energy, it directly goes to the bottom line and the profits of company. So any dollar saved is a dollar produced for the company. Now, the last part is about extending to adjacencies. What I mean by here is, if you're in a plant, you can actually, whatever learnings one has in one department, it can be translated to another department, or it can be translated to another process, or what is happening in a plant can be translated to another plants. Now, it doesn't even stop there. The adjacencies could be a home, saving of energy. I mean, what you have learned in the plant, a few snippets of that could be done in your home, which can really save energy bills at home too. Once you do it in the home, it could be your society or your neighbors, it could be there. So this learnings which we have in terms of saving energy is extendable, and adjacencies are there everywhere. The socio-economic dimension of that is improving energy efficiencies definitely lead to lower utility bills. It goes without saying, it's just maths. And Jonathan already spoke about maths. This direct you save, it reduces the utility bills. It creates jobs. This is something which is one has to understand. With all this technological innovations, partnering with people, getting into solar, it creates a number of jobs in the sustainability area. And not only that, not only about jobs, if you make a savings, the business is able to plow that savings back in to build the business. And when you build the business, more people get jobs. So it definitely does create jobs. And another one is it helps the stabilization of electricity prices and volatility. Today, if one is to look at it, and of the various supply chain issues which Jonathan was talking in the beginning, one of the major ones is the energy crisis around the world, the volatility. And we find that the energy, there is a huge crisis, and that is now accentuated by the geopolitical war, where natural gas is now in shortage in many countries. The petroleum prices have gone up. So generally, if one looks at it, one element about is that if you are able to control this, we can stabilize. There will not be so many fluctuations, and we can stabilize the prices, and thereby the volatility of energy prices in the market. Some truths I'd like to bring in. Some truths. What are the truths? See, why switch on then switch off? A common thing which has set me thinking is, you go anywhere, you see this. Please switch off the lights when you leave this room. And I started pondering, why switch on? If you switch on only, you need to switch off. So do we ask ourselves this question, do I need to switch on? Can I open the windows and can I have natural light coming in? Do I really need to put the lights on? Do I really need to switch on the air conditioner? Can the windows be opened at home, anywhere? So the question first we need to ask ourselves, it's a mindset, it's a cultural change to ask, do we need to switch on? If we need to switch on only, then we need to switch off. Next one is, if you can't measure it, then you can't improve. First and foremost in anything is to measure it. If you do not measure it, you do not know how well you're doing or how bad you're doing. So I would really encourage or invite everyone on this call to see that. If you please measure your energy consumption in the areas where you can influence, and then you can improve. And energy lost is a national loss. An energy loss, a water loss, a waste generated, it is of no benefit to anyone. In fact, it doesn't change hands and go from one person. It is a national loss. And when we talk about national loss, it affects the economy of the country, it affects the per capita, it affects the GDP. So it is it's a national loss, and it is not worth having those kind of losses, which is not to the benefit of anyone. Another area where I would encourage is for us to start looking into the natural resources we have. We have a number of natural sources. One is sunlight. We have mentioned in many places in this conversation, whether it be solar panels or whether it be use of natural light into our office rooms and our plants, are we using it fully? Is there a better way of looking at it? I mean, one would really, if you really look at it, you have these offices these days which are all glass pane. You go to the offices, you find people have put down the shutters and then the roller blinds, and then all the lights are on. Is that what we really want to do? Look at wind energy. Is there a way we can leverage our wind energy? It is not that we put up wind power plants, which are quite expensive, but is there a way we can use natural resources? So culture, I would say, is the foundation of sustainable thinking in any organization or any society where we come and where we live. So the start point is us. We need to have that mind shift from why switch on to switch off. Moving on. Now let me talk about a couple of success stories. So this first success story I want to talk about is about a plant which was into commodities. This plant was using about 800 kl of water per day. And when it is benchmarked, when the plant got the numbers 800 kl, they started measuring it. Okay, fine, then you can improve it. They found that they were using about 6 liters per kilogram of product they were making. And when they looked into benchmark and looked at competitive industries in the market, it was found that the consumption was anywhere between 1 to 1.5 liters. So this plant was using almost 4 times the water they were supposed to be using, which was best in class. So how do they go about it? They found that the water lines, as you all know, many a times it is inside the ground or inside walls. It's not visible to naked eye, and if you have a water leak under the earth, it's very difficult to identify that. So what they did was they went around, got a consultant to come in with an ultrasound scanning machine, and they found that the plant had 342 leaks. They went about repairing, plugging each leak by leak, and consequent to which, this plant, which was using 800 kl water per day, dropped down to 150 kl per day. This was almost 1/5 of the water. So this may sound that there was a water savings, but where I am bringing in is, imagine they were actually processing 150 minus 800 minus 150. That means 650 kiloliters of water was being processed and energy was being used for that, and it was wasted into the ground. So the factory made huge savings in terms of energy as well as water. And why I talk about energy is, when you compare the cost of energy to the cost of water, the cost of energy is much higher than cost of water. So the plant made a huge savings in terms of energy savings by not processing that water which was being wasted. And a case study too is about an F&B plant where the plant requisitioned for 2 compressors. They asked for new capex, and it came to the capex committee, and the capex committee rejected that. They said that please go and find out what efficiencies are you running your compressors, and really come back and tell us whether your machines are running at the capability they are designed to. So the team went back. They found that their compressors were running at 40% efficiencies. And normally a good compressor, as you all know, should have an efficiency about 80 to 85%. So they got their machines overall. They did whatever needed to be done, and they got their machines, all their compressors, back to 80%. Now, net to net, what was the result outcome of that? The outcome was that they did not need the capex to buy the new 2 compressors. Not only that, they had compressors as standby. So they were able to save a lot of money in capex and thereby improving their working capital. So, as I mentioned earlier, first one, we need to have a team thinking about it. Second, we need to have a team measuring it, trying to understand, get down to base capabilities, base capacities, to understand, are these machines running at the right capacities they are at. And we'll look at Jonathan to take us through the case study 3.
Thank you very much, John. The final case study we'll be talking about today is for a minerals processing facility located out in the bush, in the middle of nowhere, with a large, low-lying administration building. The success story there is we utilized the real estate available to us during the project, the sustainability project that we undertook on site. And we were able to offset the administration and part of the logistics side of the business, their electricity costs, by 30%. And the ROI on that project was 4 to 1. Remembering that this was out in a remote area where it gets a lot of sunlight. During the study, we found the change rooms were utilizing a number of large inefficient gas heaters that were at end of life. We were through the study, able to determine that these gas heaters could be fairly efficiently replaced with modern heat pumps, with the knock-on effect that we could actually reduce the cooling load in the office by 15%. Why could we do this? Well, heat pumps can produce both hot water and cold air concurrently. So as everyone was arriving in the morning and leaving in the evenings and taking showers, we could cool the office building. And then finally, at the processing end of the plant, so this is a large energy user, large distances, they're moving big loads of materials, tons and tons of material a day between stockpiles. Purely by changing the times at which people were transferring materials during the day, we were able to reduce electricity costs by 30%, but reducing with no reduction in the overall consumption. So simply a change in methodology, a change in the operating model allowed us to make a 30% saving to a fairly large energy bill. And what all these case studies show is that it's possible, it's being done, and it is out there. Industry is already moving on this front. So that takes us to the next slide, and rounding out our discussion on sustainability in operations. I would challenge you to think differently about how you're managing your operation or your business. You're already thinking about service levels, cash in hand, costs. But are you thinking about sustainability? Is your business conscious of what it can be doing in that space? What latent potential is sitting there waiting for you to pick it up and run with it? I would go so far as to say that operational management now has a fourth element defining success, and that is sustainability. We need to be thinking about it. And then tying that in finally into your journey. What does your sustainability journey look like? Kicking off, it's a kickoff with diagnostics, really. Know where you stand and where you want to go. Understand what your business is doing now on that front. Understand what your consumption and your output looks like, and where you want to go. Roadmap it and decide and make those decisions early. To drive success moving forward. Start that cultural shift from the top and align your strategy. Steer your business in a direction that's both sustainable and profitable. Get those KPIs, those enablers, lay the groundwork, get it out there, and start taking action. Those low-hanging fruit that John mentioned earlier, they aren't going to pluck themselves. Drive the narrative and use your cultural buy-in to drive that change at an organization and operational level. And then finally, once you're seeing success in this area, take charge. You might be making huge strides in sustainability. Your operation might be sustainable and sustainably profitable. You might already be carbon neutral. Move on. Understand what your supply chain is doing, upstream and downstream. Understand your contribution to this massive entity that is the value chain. You're part of it. Drive change at that level, and stand out as a sustainability leader. On to you, Chris, for the Q&A.
Sure. Thank you very much, John and Jonathan, for taking us through the presentation there. As David said in his introduction, I am responsible for Argon Co's business in Singapore, and we cover Southeast Asia from our Singapore office. I've seen some old friends who are attending this call and some new friends, so I look forward to meeting some more of you in the future. We have a question box on the application here, so you're very, very welcome to post some questions, and I will ask them from John and Jonathan. But to kick us off, I'd like to explore with Jonathan a bit more about some of these energy and opportunities. We've seen a number of different areas where companies can address energy, reduce waste, reduce water usage. Some of the examples one might think of as being fairly obvious, but maybe the just companies haven't paid attention to them previously, and by paying attention, they can fairly quickly get some benefits. In other words, these are the low hanging fruits which are easy to collect. But Jonathan, generally, having worked across a number of different companies, what's your view of where businesses are today? Do you think these low hanging fruits have largely been harvested now, and now we have to get out our step ladders and try to reach some of the more difficult ones? Or do you think there is more opportunity that is easily achievable and simply achievable?
Thanks, Chris. I think, as with many of these things, the answer is grey. Certainly in a business where if you are in that space where your corporate strategy or your steering in terms of sustainability is in its infancy, I would say that there is probably more than you would think available to you for you to do. So in terms of initiatives and strategies that you can implement, that is a realm where you'd be abundant. If you haven't been, deliberately investigating it before, absolutely, it's not staring you in the face. You have to go look for it. On the front of business that has sustainability and is driving this at an operational level, I think it's more about the context changing than it is about the low-hanging fruit disappearing, so to speak. If you apply the continuous improvement sort of mindset to it, there is always this much work to do. How you define your low-hanging fruit, I think, will change over time. So what to one business is low-hanging fruit, as John mentioned earlier, switching lights on and off. A fairly mature business where might have all of that down pat, their low-hanging fruit become slightly more complex, but because they've been on this journey, it would become it becomes easier to implement, let me say.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. John, I'd like to ask you a question. John, prior to joining Argon Co, you were a senior executive in one of the large multinational companies responsible for health, safety, and sustainability across the Asia-Pacific region. So you had to manage some of these complex programs across multiple geographies and multiple entities to drive sustainability. My question is, I get it that you can start a program like this with a great deal of razzmatazz and build up enthusiasm, but how do you sustain it? How do you sustain it year after year to continually drive improvement and generate those savings?
Thanks, Chris. So maybe I have to answer this in a couple of parts. First and foremost is, engagement. So when you have the commitment of the senior management and you see that they have and they recognize, they reward and recognize for what, the value you bring onto the table, it in itself is a motivation for people. So the moment it doesn't necessarily have to be at a corporate or a regional level, even at a plant level. If you have been acknowledged saying that, hey, you've done a great job in bringing sustainability, you have done it. And I do think that is a great way of engagement. And I can tell you, when I used to have my travel across the EMEA region, that's Africa, Middle East, Asia Pacific region, all the factories when I went, there was definitely a moment where the factory would have, where was a reward and recognition. And I was asked to give away, they used to explain to me, and I was asked to give away tokens of appreciation in terms of certificates or probably company POS to really compliment them for their work. So that is one way of keeping engagement and keeping it going. The second one is purely numbers. So when you see that your contribution is delivering a certain numbers, a dollar, X dollars to the business, in itself is a motivation for people to. Now, I will also touch upon what Jonathan just mentioned, low-hanging fruits. Low-hanging fruits are always there. It's like productivity. Never does the productivity programs end. It started 30 years back. It's still on. Companies are still getting onto. There is nothing called scraping the bottom of the well. It will keep on happening. It's the way how you look at it. So there's a number of ways by which engagement, looking at low-hanging fruits, looking at new avenues and opportunities, getting the dollar value in. These are ways how one should keep moving and keep it dynamic to see that people are engaged. And, the program is sustainable. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, John. I guess my next question is, could be for either of you, so please jump in. You've mentioned lots of different ideas that our listeners and viewers can go away and start trying in their businesses. And that's great. That's something very practical people can do. But how should they prioritize, given if they're starting this for the first time? Where should they go first?
Okay, I can take that. So, see, it is about identifying opportunities. So it's a bag full of opportunities, a bag full of ideas. These are the X number. And true enough, a number of ideas will come onto the table. Now, how to prioritize them? There are a couple of ways which you can prioritize them. One, to see that, which projects are not really capital intensive. The moment you get into capital intensive part, you need to, put in a proposal. You need to go to, depending on the size of the investment, it has to go to multi layers, get approval. It becomes a complex process by itself. And one thing which my experience is that sustainability projects normally do not have the return of investment of any other productivity projects. Normally projects ROI is probably 4 to 5 years. So any CFO would look anywhere between 20 to 33% return year on year. And here in this case, sustainability products seldom give you as high as 15%. Normally in the single digit to 15% is what one would see in terms of return on investment. So it takes about 6 to 7 years to get the money back. So look at projects where you don't have to really put in a lot of capex. That is one way of looking at it. The second one is the ease. So you have a mapping, you have the probability versus the difficulty in executing a project. If you have one on the x-axis and y-axis, and you look at it where your probability is high, and the difficulty in executing that is low, you would definitely go for projects there. So if you can put in a 9x9 matrix, you can get that box where the probability is very high and the degree of effort put to is. So those are the low-hanging fruits which one must go. So these are my 2 point or leading indicators. I would say that one should adapt to look at where to prioritize.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan. You mentioned in your last slide a sort of a graph showing a progressive capability and progressive deep diving into this whole subject of generating cost efficiencies and sustainability improvements at the same time. My question is, and we focused, because the subject today was about operations and particularly around factories. But as supply chain managers, we're dealing with extended supply chains, all the way from raw material suppliers through to intermediate suppliers, through our own distribution, out through our customer base, and into end of life, and maybe the polluting effects of the end product, or even the ability to recirculate and recycle and reuse. How can we, as supply chain managers, make better decisions? You mentioned incorporating sustainability into that, but how can we better understand the impact of the decisions that we're making on the total supply chain and the total environmental impacts that we're making?
Thanks, Chris. There are certainly methods and tools available to do that. So if you look at the flight path that I had up earlier, it starts with an operational diagnostic, and it ends with a supply chain diagnostic, effectively, and that is, again, mapping out your entire value chain, understanding the contributing factors at each node or each point in that value chain, understanding where you stand within that, and then exerting your influence, making the decisions based on that, identifying the key nodes in the value chain that are your low-hanging fruit or your problem points, and exerting your influence in the value chain to drive change in those areas. So it's looking beyond your own business, landscaping where you sit relative to everyone else in the value chain, leadership at your end, and then driving change outward.
Okay, cool. Well, just one last second for anyone to post one last question to the chat room. Otherwise, I shall move on and conclude the session. First of all, I'd like to just thank my fellow speakers for their input today, and to say that if you have any interest in following up any of these topics with us at Argon Co, you're very welcome to contact us at the email addresses shown there. So David, as he explained in the beginning, covers Australia and New Zealand. I cover Southeast Asia. If you're outside of any of those regions, please just send a message to me and I'll forward it to the appropriate person to cover you in your market. And we'd be very happy to engage further and discuss these topics with you. We will be putting on further webinars around this area. If you have any requests for specific topics, whether it's about the broader supply chain or whether it's deep dives on waste reduction, for example, please let us know and we'll take those into account in our plans. Otherwise, I'll just close the window and give us all a chance to say goodbye. Thank you for listening and see you on the next webinar. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.